Hey everyone. First, I'd like to apologize for not showing up for the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's been hectic and busy for me, but I'm happy to return and even happier to discuss something that is somewhat controversial, but quite intriguing and interesting to talk about. I would like to introduce Professor Bruce McGraw. Hello, Professor McGraw. How are you?
Good. How you doing,
Very
Hanney?
good. You've had a very long career teaching philosophy in the University of San Diego. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I teach in the actually I teach in the more in a community college in the University of San Diego. But yeah, well, I've been teaching about 30 years in philosophy and religious studies and mythology, and I find it really interesting. I've always been interested in the events of the world, and I feel like as I was growing up, I got caught up in the Vietnam War and things like that and protesting. And, as I went along and I kept looking at, why are things so messed up on the planet? It always pushed me deeper and deeper. And finally, there was that one area, philosophy, which I really had never ventured into. But I finally got to the point like, well, maybe they can explain some of these things to me because, I don't know, things seem to be really messed up these days. So it's one of my quest to kind of understand why things are the way they are.
Philosophy is a very interesting discipline. It was one of our very first ways of getting to reach knowledge in terms of epistemology and even the ontology of things. What are things for real or not? And we get the first conflict between teacher and student, between Plato and Aristotle. One is pointing up to the sky with his index, and the other one with Pam, flat to the ground, saying, "Well, knowledge is here; it's not from out there." Um, uh, do you think we're still in that conflict? We still are split in two entities or two groups of people. One are saying, well, the knowledge is outside of us and we're just discovering it as we go. And the second saying, no, 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 it's just all around us and it's intelligible, and science has done enough now for us to understand enough about our conditions.
Yeah, I think that's still one of the big issues. Plato talked about the ideas in these world of the forms, these perfect ideas, and Aristotle, Plato's student, as you said, took those ideas of forms and brought them down to earth. And he said, no, there's no transcendent reality. I think we still have that discussion going on. What I think is more important is what I think is more important is the attitude that these both of them did, because even though Plato and Aristotle disagreed a lot, Plato, I think you could see an effect in some of his later dialogues, the influence of Aristotle. And even Aristotle stayed in Plato's academy until he died, and then offered this altar to his teacher. So even though they started going in opposite directions, they both had enough open-mindedness, I guess, to learn from each other and respect each other. And so I think that's really, really the key thing here, and something we could really use today.
Then you have the Grand Master, Socrates, who might have never existed, but it doesn't matter because the idea is still there. Is the questioner, is the guy who's going around the market and doesn't really have answers, but have enough questions for people to start, not taking things for granted. What do you think of that stance?
I love Socrates, I mean, he was out there in the street, so to say, in the marketplace, just talking to people. And, the stories are he would sit there in the kind of the marketplace and place in Athens, and people would walk by and he just sort of confront them and get into these discussions with them and challenge them. And I know, at least the stories are sometimes people get so mad, they kick him and they beat him. And he was a tough guy. He'd just get back up there and he'd keep going, because he really thought, as we might want to get into this, but he felt he had this sort of inner diamond in him that, pushed him to do that. And, he said in his trial, if I had stopped doing this, I would have sinned against my God, basically. And by God, he just meant this inner helper, this inner guide, this inner spirit that, you know, I think I heard, this sort of took the idea of what we call a negative summons, that this inner spirit never told Socrates what to do. It only told him what not to do. And so, all the way, he never got the message he should stop what he's doing. And so, he took it all the way to his death. So, yeah, I don't know. I love Socrates. I do think he had a hidden agenda, but his approach to make everybody, question everything, is dangerous, because people really cling to their beliefs and ideas, and they can get pretty upset when,
It's
when
very
they get
unsettling
challenged.
indeed. Yeah, no, we share. I love Socrates. That way, that method is quite powerful. It might be metaphorical. It might not happen as exactly as we've been told, but it's quite interesting. Getting people out of their comfort zone and complacency, because it's creeping in, and we're going to get into that. We've reached a certain heights now where we think we're above certain measures, but we get humbled every now and then, and we're going to need to have a better understanding of our conditions. But I want to get to the question of we open our eyes, and suddenly that beam of consciousness inside between our two eyes and inside the skull, where we can taste and smell and fear and hope, and we don't know where we've come from. We have no realization of a previous existence, and we suddenly have to make sense of everything. That's all of us thrown into this life, and we're trying to understand. Okay, is just life is about surviving and eating and drinking, having sex and falling in love and out of love, or there is more? And if there is more, have someone brought us here? And what was the purpose? Is a lot of questions going on here, and we've been split from Eastern traditions, where the reincarnation and us perfecting ourselves over time, and the evolution and the dynamic life is not never stagnant. It's always moving. It's always reoccurring. Or the biblical one, which is a little bit of a father, a tough father, who's teaching humanity through um, teachers and prophets and words, or my worldview, which is we've evolved, but that's not it. So we still have our consciousness, we still suffer, and we still fall in love, and so we can maintain the atheistic materialistic point of view, but without losing the spirituality, which is keeping us together. Where does Bruce McGraw sort of sit in all these three directions?
Wow. Well, I look at, I sort of look, there's the traditional sort of religious thing, if I hear what you're talking. And, we could go back to the age of mythology, when the ancient cultures, they had their myths and the stories, and those stories gave people, basically told them who they were, where they came from, what their purpose was, and how they fit into the whole thing. And the Bible has these stories also. And so back then, people used to believe these literally, and so maybe that's what you're talking about as the authority in the sky. And then science comes along and pretty much disproves at least the literal sense of all of these stories, which is important. It's sort of like growing up. It's like I have my granddaughters, and my wife has created this. They're like 6, 7, 8, and she's created this little fairy garden, and so she has the fairies bring them little gifts, and they go out and they get them, and they send the fairy thing. So that's like a fantasy thing, like children. But eventually, they're going to realize that those aren't real. So you move on and you grow up, and so humanity has to grow up. We have to sort of understand things. So science has given us a new story. I'm going to just say it's the Big Bang Theory. And it's incredible. I mean, the knowledge, what we know now that that we didn't know before about the creation of the universe, 13.8 billion years, and the subsequent evolution up to up to the present time is just the knowledge is great, and I think most of the knowledge is irrefutable. But then the only problem I have with that, and I think, because I look at the world and I see all the problems in the world, is that the Big Bang story tells us that it's all an accident. The Big Bang was an accident, and basically random chance and accidents basically led us up today, which is a really difficult thing to believe. And so when you talk about being a materialist and an atheist, but also with a bit of if I heard you right, a bit of a spiritual something holding it together, I'm not quite sure what you mean, because I know we have these traditional arguments between like creationism and the scientific story. Those are always what we debate. And, to me, it's such a ridiculous debate, because how can you take these other stories seriously? So then you have the evolution story. And then I think, well, the real debate, if we could ever get out of the old one, is what is the driving force behind evolution? So my idea is the driving force behind evolution is the fact that evolution is basically underneath and driving it is this creative intelligence. It's an intelligent intention that's sort of pushing evolution forward, and it's pushed it through all these things. I don't know how we can really look to going from nothing to the sophisticated world just by an accident. I got a few quotes here. I just wanted to read this one by Sir Fred Hoyle, who's sort of the one who came up with the Big Bang theory. Actually, it was a derogatory comment.
A joke.
But he said, let's be scientifically honest with ourselves. The probability of having life arise to greater and greater complexity and organization by chance is the same probability of having a tornado tear through a junkyard and form out the other end a Boeing 747. So, so I think his point is right on. And I think, in my book, I go through these different stages. I call them miracles that happen in evolution. And I think, when we hear a story, we assume, we sort of know the story and we go, yeah, this happened. We don't really pay attention. But if you really look at some of these miracles of how things develop, they really are quite miraculous. And it makes you kind of scratch your head. And you might be able to look at a few of them and go, well, it's just coincidence. But when they start stacking up the way they stack up, then it gets hard to say every one of them was a coincidence. So I think there is this deeper spiritual intelligence that we've lost touch with. And I think we need to get back in touch with. So I don't know, maybe I'm presenting a little bit different paradigm than what you were presenting when you talked about it. But
well, yeah, the Fred Hoyle Boeing 747 is been debunked, like quite convincingly as well. Like it commits too many fallacies, fallacy of composition, too many fallacies actually in there, because this is not how accidents occur, and especially in an organic evolution of pressure. But if he's talking about the emergence of the Big Bang, for example, whether it's an accident or not, believe it or not, Dr. McGraw, the conversation right now is the Big Bang. It doesn't have to be necessarily the ultimate beginning. As a matter of fact, this is the direction where it's actually heading. With physicists, renowned physicists and mathematicians are actually thinking the Big Bang could have been one event in a, and it actually will still suit your theory, because imagine the Big Bang isn't the ultimate beginning; it's just another stepping stone in reality and in existence, which will make things even more complicated.
Are you talking about like a multiverse type of approach?
Where it is, yeah. So it's the multiverse, and there's evidence of it's and even the infinities and other terms where things are not made possible, but existence could be eternal. That the actual existence with a capital E is eternal, and this could be the God of. If you'd have to give that term to something, then existence with a capital E might be it. It's always existed, but it's always evolves into something different, and it never goes away.
Well, yeah. So does it exist separate from, would you say that exists separate from material entities?
Interesting, interesting. So,
Because that's what, that's kind of an Aristotelian position.
yeah,
The
are
prime
you saying,
mover.
yeah, are you saying the ontology of existence is not material? And if so, well, we don't know. We don't know. I mean, with quantum
Right.
mechanics now, we look at the duality of things, and things are in superposition, and the particles can have dual nature of wave and particle at the same time. So it is quite. Maybe we don't. Maybe we should be honest and say maybe we just don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know. That's the thing. I mean, it could be right. It all could have been an accident. I mean, I can't prove that it's not. I can't prove that there's an intelligence behind the whole thing. We can't prove anything. And in these kind of situations, I like to use, William James, the pragmatic philosopher. He said when you get in these kind of conundrums where facts can't prove either side, he says you should always look at the solution that has the best cash value, or is the most, gives you the biggest bang for your buck. And so if we looked at it this way, we'd say, does believe, and you have no evidence that either one of them is correct. I mean, it's not like more evidence for one than the other. You just don't know. And he says, is it believing that, and this is my thing, he didn't talk about this, but taking an example, believing the universe is meaningless, accidental, which means our lives are meaningless and accidental, and we really shouldn't be here. Is that better than believing a universe has an intelligence behind it, intelligence behind the whole evolutionary process of which we are all a part of? And so our lives then take on a real meaning. And, and James says, which one is more subjectively satisfying? Which one's more rational in the sense that, there's more, you get more out of the belief. And I would say you'd have to, on that side, go with my idea, because part of my book is we're seeing the results of, I think, this modern creation story, which basically tells us we're meaningless and purposeless. And when that happens, people they don't have anything higher to believe in, so everything claps down on them. And then it's like, well, my life doesn't really have any meaning. If it's just only a subconscious idea, then I better go out and do everything I can and have as much fun as I can and do whatever, because this is pretty much my one shot and that's it. So I think, just on that thing, but I think there's other evidence for my view, but just looking at it that way, I think, you'd have to side with the idea that there's an intelligent intention behind the evolution, as opposed to it's just all random accidents, because, it looks like maybe, that view is going to lead us to do some real disasters here.
Yeah, well, and it's going to depend now on understanding in scientific terms, randomness versus chaos versus accidents and chances, and these are very subtle terms that mean different things, because randomness does not mean necessarily chaotic or completely out of the blue. In a theory of randomness, it is actually certain algorithms and certain parameters and a range that you move within. So it's not completely accidental as such, but it's a certain parameters and certain possibilities that you move within. But I do understand. You see, the problem is I do understand, and this is where Nietzsche, I think we were talking off air about Nietzsche and Marx and the way they were talking about religion and God, and they were not celebrating that void. They were concerned because maybe humanity isn't mature enough to let go of such ideas that united them in the first place and probably helped them survive. It might not be true, but it still helped us survive millennia. And you don't want to create a vacuum of a spiritual hole where we head into the oblivion. Maybe we need to be carefully replacing this with one that still unites us. And I'm going to bring up your wonderful book here. Dr. McGraw, you wrote a book recently about the magical universe, and it's focusing on and what's so clever about this, and what I like about this, It's giving humanity something to unite around, something of a true potential to destroy us all and our home, and it will give us something to work together on. Uh, when you finished this book quite recently, didn't you, Professor McGraw?
Yeah, I just finally published it in about a little over a month ago. And I have to tell you, this is a very short book. I think it's only like 80 pages. It's got big print. I mean, you can read it in a day. And I did that on purpose because actually before this, I'd written a book that's about 75,000 words that I called The New Mythology. That is this book, but in a lot more detail. And I gave it to some people just to read. And sort of a common thing was, I got through it and then it just got too heavy and I just stopped reading it, and I think, you need to make something easier to read. And so I thought about it because I'm writing I think I'm trying to take some of these ideas and make them available to the general public. And so I thought about it and I decided I should simplify the book down first. So I still have that other book, which I am going to put out, but I decided I should do a simpler version. And so this is kind of what that is, just to give people an idea of this vision. And then, in 6 months or so, maybe I'll put out the other one for people who like to read more detail on it. So yeah, it's a call. I think, one of our biggest issues is we need a new story. And so what I'm trying to do with this new creation story that I'm coming up is to give a story that actually unites the whole planet, because we're all part of this creation story. It's not a creation story for any separate religion or country or sect or race or anything. It's a story that unites the planet. And I think what we need as a people is a common story that gives us common values and that kind of connection with each other. And so when we realize we really are the universe, I know I'm probably going to get into this, but we've heard the idea that the universe. My idea is the evolution of the universe has sort of groped its way forward, and it's created human beings, and so the human beings are in a sense the universe way of becoming aware of itself. And now, rather than just submitting to this God, I call it the universe, we have to work with the universe. We have to re-tap back into this intelligence of the universe to solve these problems, to feel that connection. And the universe can't do it itself because it didn't create these problems. We created this problem. We created these problems, kind of cut bait, the creative intelligence of the universe. It was a necessary stage, I think, for humanity to go through this modern stage. It's done a lot for us, but it's also now sort of run its course, and it's leading us to, for me, the biggest problem, as I mentioned in the subtitle, is climate change, because it's the one issue that, all the other big issues we have, if we just have a change of heart, we can solve them. But climate change, we can't, because climate change has these tipping points that scientists tell us about them. And I think there's something over 50 tipping points where if you go too far in certain systems, they just run out of control, and a tipping point is, sort of like, if I lean back in my chair, if I keep leaning back, it's good, but then I'll hit that point where gravity and everything takes over and I'll go over backwards no matter what, and I can't control it. So that, that's what's going to happen to the environment. And once those tipping points get activated, the environment's really going to spin out of control. And then we've pretty much lost, I wouldn't say lost the planet, but we've lost our civilization on the planet. And so, we just had this recent IPCC report out that said, the window is really narrowing for us to do something. And, instead of the world finally sort of waking up and coming together to solve this imminent problem, we end up with this war in Iraq, which, has pretty much drowned out the IPCC report. And, and once again, climate change gets put on the back burner. And it's just an interesting subject because you have to wonder why people don't want to deal with climate change and why the media doesn't want to deal with climate change. Because in the end, I don't think it's climate change is the problem. It's our reaction to climate change that's the problem. The fear, the insecurity. It's such an enormous thing. We feel powerless to do anything, so we just go off and do something else. And so what I think people need to do is they need to face climate change, and they need to deal with those inner fears and insecurities and whatnot, and go deep inside themselves. And by doing that and keep going in, they can, eventually reach that creative intelligence of the universe. And when they get down there, that's when they find out who they are, what their purpose is, sort of what the old creation stories used to do. And then you find out what you're supposed to be doing with your life at this time. So I think climate change is like the perfect issue for now. And I think the universe has given us climate change as a way to wake us up, because it's time for human beings once again to make a major transformation, not unlike the transformation that was made from the Middle Ages to the modern age. Now we need a new transformation into what some people would call an integral age.
I had myself on mute.
That's okay.
Professor McGraw, let me falsify that position and see if we can get somewhere. If global warming and climate change is a product of our interventions as humans, with all the technologies and all the carbon monoxide that we've created, and it's our greed to accumulate power, wealth, and overcultivate, and treatment of animals and farm animals all over the world has contributed to this problem. But we have evidence to suggest that the world, even before humans in the universe, and it was even more hostile. We're talking about the moon was created some 300, 400 million years after the emergence of the planet Earth by a meteor or another smaller planet hitting Earth and splitting a piece that sort of was gathered by gravity to create the satellite, which is our moon. We're talking about meteors hitting Earth and the melting lava around Earth for close to 700 million years. The dinosaurs, who were very successful for hundreds of millions of years, they sort of killed instantaneously by a cosmic event that has nothing to do with the intervention of humanity. It looks like even without our existence, the problem still persists. If there's a conscience or is a direction of some sort, well, it's kind of chaotic. It doesn't care too much about sentient beings, because you would recognize that these animals did not have much fun being melted alive. So what gives here?
Well, as it comes to the disasters and everything, I think the unique thing about, at least what I'm talking about with climate change is, I think it's a human caused disaster. So I think that all the other extinctions that have come about have been sort of supernatural kind of events. But here, I think humans, if we become extinct, will be the only species that ever caused its own extinction. So I think that's sort of an interesting idea. And you're right. I mean, when I talk about this natural intelligence, it's a hard one to define. And how many species have gone extinct? It goes through, and it's not this syrupy, loving type of God. It's moving forward, and I think it looks at creatures if they don't serve a certain evolutionary purpose. And I think human beings are on the brink now. It's like the universe is like, how are you going to handle this crisis? Can humanity evolve to the next stage and continue to serve an evolutionary purpose? Or, are they another failed experiment like the mastodon and the woolly mammoth and whatnot? And then, they're going to go. But in our case, we're going to go because of us. And that's going to be the unique thing. And, it's a funny thing about the volcano that destroyed the dinosaurs, And I don't know if this thing controls natural laws or this intelligence. I mean, it's hard to really understand it. But if that asteroid had not hit and destroyed the dinosaurs, that's really what opened the way for mammals to develop. Not saying that's part of the plan or anything, but I just think it's sort of an interesting coincidence that, what was going to get rid of the dinosaurs that were the dominant species and running everything. And, the mammals, these little mammals running around hiding in the rocks, they couldn't get their foothold. And so somehow for evolution to continue, the dinosaurs had to go. Now, I'm fully willing to admit it was just a weird coincidence, but it was in a sense, for evolution, it was a very positive disaster that happened because.
Look, I would agree, but if there's an intelligence behind this, it must be quite capricious because it's using sentient beings to predicate this sort of development and evolution upon that kind of position. I would understand it that these are vessels void from of emotions and feelings and pain, but if this is built upon pain, and we call this, there is a designer or intelligent designer of some sort, and that is conscious, there it's quite capricious.
I wouldn't say it's an intelligent designer. That kind of implies that it's an all-knowing deity that sort of has designed the whole thing. I think this is a universe, almost, it's hard to describe, but it's almost in the Hegelian sense as this spirit that's kind of going through evolution and going this way and that way and sort of groping and feeling its way through as it moves forward. It sort of knows the direction it's moving in, where it wants to go, but it does, it's in a sense, it's almost like trial and error. And, talk about natural selection, and then certain things get created and the universe goes, this is the natural way to go. And then we go this way. And so the universe's aim is to keep moving forward, keep developing, and things that don't serve that end up becoming extinct. I mean, it's not, it is a, it's a hard kind of a, I guess a deity or whatever you want to say it's not really even a deity. It's a hard kind of an intelligence, I think, to get our minds around in that kind of way. But I think it's the wisdom that all the great spiritual teachers are talking, from Lao Tzu and Taoism. It's the Tao, it's Brahman, it's spirit, it's all of these things that it's the underlying intelligence that we want to get in touch with that runs everything. And
but what if it's a feature inbuilt in the system, just like a water going through a stream, and if there's a blockage, the water will stop and it will try to find an area where it continues streaming down the river. Right. So it's inbuilt, so it's not conscious of itself. It does not have any intelligence of any sort. It just obeys certain parameters that's been priorly inbuilt into the movement of things. It's going forwards, it's evolving. It doesn't require anything. And if this is eternal, if that existence is eternal, then it just answers all the questions. It's just inbuilt. If you're stagnant, you die. You've got to keep moving. You've got to keep evolving. You got to keep, and we can so I can completely fight the fight with you, coming completely from a secular point of view. This is our home, and it's under threat, and I need to save it, just like as much as even a religious person who would believe that God has a plan, and the plan is for him to save the planet. I will still hold hands with him or her and say, okay, we are united. We might have slightly different motivation, but if this house is going to be on fire, it's going to be on fire. It's going to kill us all, regardless if we believe it, we don't. So I might as well, help the cause. But I can come completely from a secular perspective.
Yeah, I think the big thing about my view of evolution is, when it gets to human, the Big Bang evolution goes forward physically. Basically, it's a physical evolution. We see physical objects, material objects change form. But I think in my thing, once we get to human, the evolution goes inward. And now it's an evolution of consciousness that develops. And so I would say it's not so much you sit around going, I have to save it, I have to save it. There's that saying, you can't solve a problem from the same mindset that created it. So if you're still in that same mindset, you're probably not going to save it. You need to get out of that mindset. And so I think even before we can save the planet, we have to sort of save ourselves. And that's that journey inward. Joseph Campbell calls it the hero's journey, because that's where we have to go to kind of find out who we really are, and not act from just our little narrow ego, which is, acting out of fear and doubt and, all these negative emotions we have. But we have to go deeper. We have to transcend that, because I think we have this deeper self. The Hindus call it the Atman, this deeper self that we have. And, enlightenment happens when your Atman gets in touch with that Brahman, which is their definition of ultimate reality. So I think human beings, really, this is first of all about saving ourselves, and then we can save the planet. It reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is sitting up on this hill, and his, I think his uncle had sort of somehow he's been given the kingdom from his father, but he had promised to give it back when his brothers got old enough, and he decided not to. He's going to give the kingdom to his son. And so Arjuna realized he's up on the mountain. He's got to go fight to get this back. And his uncle's a fairly terrible ruler. And he looks down and he sees, who am I going to fight? I'm going to fight I fight my relatives. I'm going to fight people who I've gone to school with. I'm going to fight my teachers. I'm going to fight people I grew up with. I'm going to have to go kill these people. I can't do it. And he says, he sits down, he said, can't do it. And, his charioteer is Krishna, who is there to advise him. And Krishna ends up telling him, no, you're a warrior. You have to fight. This is your duty. This is your dharma. And it doesn't even matter. Actually, it's not even important whether you win or lose. You might win or you might lose. It doesn't matter. You have to do it because this is your dharma. This is your calling. This is what you are here to do. And that's all that matters. And so I think, and so translating that, what I was saying, for us, we may save the planet, we may not save the planet, but we have to find out what is in a sense, our dharma, our deeper duty, and what is our purpose here. I think that's the most important thing. And if a lot of people do that, I think that's, then we have a chance to save the problem. But if we all just stay in our same mindset, I don't think we have a chance. I don't think unless we become a different kind of people, I don't know if we have much of a chance to save it remaining as we are.
So we're biologically we're animals. We our brain is about 525 million years in evolution. We start with the ancient brain, or the reptilian brain, which is the backside. It's ruled most of the species for the first 200-300 million years. We turn from cold-blooded animals to warm-blooded animals. We develop the middle brain, which has the emotions and a lot of other stabilizing factors. And we only last 2 or 3 million years, we have the prefrontal lobe cortex, and I think consciousness probably emerges at that point. Daniel Dennett reckons consciousness is an illusion. So is freedom of free will. However, we are not the victims of that illusion. We're the beneficiaries of that illusion. It's something to simplify a very complex operations that happen in the brain, and it gives you the front panel of a desktop where you can see things quite clearly and quite simply. And there are approximations, but that's why our optical senses are quite flawed. And most of the things that we see, we're not really seeing. Colors don't exist. And it's approximation of things. Otherwise, we won't get things done. Could consciousness be an evolutionary trick that helps us survive? Because if we are aware of ourselves, we can then develop something called empathy, in which helps us have that human or prototype of a human some 3-4 million years ago, with a cast in his broken leg, because his little group has helped him heal his broken leg and not leave him like other animals would do. So with that development of empathy through the prefrontal lobe cortex helped us survive, and therefore consciousness or the illusion of it has emerged.
Well, I would disagree with that whole premise. I don't think, I know a lot of materialists and those people do say that consciousness is sort of an epiphenomenon of the brain. And, the Dalai Lama, when they told him that, he said, the notion that the brain created consciousness is a metaphysical assumption. It's not a scientific fact. And so, again, I would have to go along with the Dalai Lama and, people in that regard. You look at what we hear as kind of enlightened beings. One is Ramana Maharshi, and in India, and he was, even at the age of like 16 or 17, he was wondering what death is. So he went through this little experiment where he actually went down and he imagined he died and his body was decaying and they were carrying him out and all this stuff. And he said, yeah, my body died and all these died, but what didn't die was consciousness, and the consciousness will never die. And, I think that's absolutely true. Another thing, I don't know if you've read some of Michael Pollan's books, who, he wrote a lot about health, but he's gotten into these psychedelic stuff, drugs and whatnot. And, and he used to be a materialist, a hard-blood materialist. And he would say, people get in these states and they go, oh, it's all love and everything. And he'd say, this sounded so corny to me. And, he took various different psychedelics, but he got himself into these states. And all of a sudden he was saying, it's all love. It's all so beautiful. It's everything. And he said, I couldn't believe I was saying these things I used to in my old view thought was corny. So I think, I really think that what I would call people need to have some kind of a mystical experience, because people who have had mystical experiences realize the consciousness they go into, actually, it's not only it's not a fantasy, but it's more real to them than this everyday waking sort of consciousness we have. And, and I've had an experience like that myself, and it completely changed my life. That's why I have this, this perspective. So it comes from experience. Joseph Campbell talks about the story when he was, I don't know if he was in a sauna or somewhere, he was sitting next to this Catholic priest, and the priest looked over and he says, Mr. Campbell, do you have faith in God? And Campbell turned to him and he said, I don't need faith. I have experience. And so I think people have these inner experiences of alternate realities, which is consciousness.
The question, Dr. McGraw, how reliable are these experiences? Because we know that the human brain is capable of hallucinations, seeing things where, like I'll give you an example, pareidolia, which is something we developed from something called hyperactive age detection that evolved with us, helped us survive. But as a result, we see faces on a piece of toast and on the moon, and faces in every, because we recognize faces. We need to see faces smiling back at us. And as a result, we hyper detect faces in everything, and that gives them our experience a little bit of a flawed perspective. Memory is quite flawed. Recollection of events. How reliable is personal experience?
Well, I'm not saying everything you experience in one of these sort of mystical experiences is the experience itself, I think, is real. Some of the ideas that might come out of it, I don't know. But it's, the problem with these kind of experiences, and the reason they sort of go against the modern world, is you can't prove them. They're not empirical. There's no way. It's like you can't prove God. People who don't believe in God say, well, show me God. Give me some empirical proof for God. Well, you can't do that because God, the concept of God is not an empirical thing. So it's an impossible thing to prove. And, maybe it's similar to, if I was, when I'm teaching my class, if a student comes up and says, Miss McGraw, I have a headache. I have to leave. And I go, well, prove to me you have a headache. And they go, well, I can't prove it. I mean, I just have one. And I say, well, prove it. And they say, well, and they go, oh, it hurts. I go, well, I can do that. And I don't have a headache.
But if pressed, you can do a scan.
But let me finish. The reason I believe it is because I've had headaches before and I know what a headache is. But unfortunately, many people haven't had a mystical experience. So they still sound kind of weird, wild, and crazy. And, so you could be saying, you have a headache because chemicals are doing this and it giving you the illusion of a headache, but it's not real. So I don't know. That's sort of how I look at it. It's almost like, I mean, if you don't believe in that, was the Buddha just hallucinating? Was Lao Tzu just hallucinating? Was Ramana Maharshi hallucinating? Was the Dalai Lama? I mean, if you think of all these brilliant people, and what's interesting is that in the world of science, the quantum physicists, almost all of the major quantum physicists were mystics at heart. And, if you read a book by Ken Wilber called Quantum Questions, he actually has the writings of these different quantum physicists, and they all have a mystical view of life. And it's very interesting. They do make the distinction. They don't believe quantum physics proves the mystical view of life, but at least what quantum physics does that the old physics didn't do. The old physics prevented it, but quantum physics doesn't prove it at all, but at least it says, we don't disprove it either. So if you want to believe in this, it doesn't violate quantum physics.
I just want to, with the headache example, you can still verify that independently. So if somebody's suffering headache or migraine, you can put the brain under scans and you can actually see the hyper chambers and the firing of the neurons and where the blockage is. So you can still verify the conditions because it's a material. It's happening in a physical realm, and therefore you can still detect it if pressed. While visions or personal interpretations and what you experience subjectively, and that's what consciousness. That's why it's difficult, because it's the subjective experience. It's the voice inside your head, and it's very difficult to explain.
Well, it's an experience. It's not a voice. It's an experience. And the thing is, it's real. When you're in it, it changes your life. William James talked about it also. It changes things. It's hard to explain.
But why some people can get them and some can't? I've done ayahuasca, and I've done a couple of other things, and my brain has gone wacky, and I've realized why it's gone wacky.
Visions and
yes, all of that. But I can understand why it's happened, because if the brain is made of chemicals and you play with the chemicals, you'll be able to see certain things. As a matter of fact, you can now open the brain and press certain things in the brain, where you can motivate certain areas of the brain, where you can see certain things if you want to. We know that the brain is capable of that. The near-death experience situation, where a lot of people experience the same stuff, but it's because of certain opiates that sort of get released at the time of death, that maybe it's like sort of comforting you or making it easy for you to pass. We see these things, but are they real? Are they real? That's the problem. Or is it just our brain is playing tricks on us like it's always done for millennia?
Well, that's the big question. I'm sure people, under what they say as a mystical experience, I'm sure you could look at the brain and say, oh, it's all these chemicals firing, and that's what explains it. The question is, I think, is which one comes first? Is it the chemicals that create the illusion of this experience, or is it the experience that creates the chemicals in the brain? Sort of like which one comes first. Can you consciously change your brain state, or are you a slave to your brain state? If you're feeling really depressed and you get say, oh, I'm tired of being depressed, I'm going to sort of focus my concentration on something, and I'm going to get myself out of this depression. And people can do that. So that kind of tells me, in a sense, consciousness also, sometimes we're subject to the chemicals of the brain. I'm not saying it never happens, but I think there's also the possibility of our consciousness affecting the brains. That consciousness comes first, and then the chemicals are the result of that.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing about the consciousness, and I'll probably move into something else. If it's not an a phenomena or a byproduct of the brain, why then, if consciousness can exist independent of the physical realm of the brain, why then you get completely altered personalities when something happens to the brain? For example, it was a very couple of famous situations where it was a guy who suddenly, out of the sudden, developed pedophilia, and there was a tumor found on top of the amygdala, which is the area that controls judgment and stuff like that, moral judgment. They've operated, they've removed the tumor, pedophilia is gone, guy's normal again. Tumors reoccurred, and the person has gone back to that sort of dangerous idea, and it altered the personality. Another one called the split brain syndrome, where the patient of epilepsy, they sever the right and the left hemisphere, um, causing the two sides of the brains don't communicate with each other, and it caused in one incident a guy who's half atheist, half believer in one of the two brains. So if personality is byproduct of the consciousness, this is who you are, and that gets completely altered by the tampering of the brain. So why is they are so connected, and why is consciousness not superseding the physical realm of the brain?
Well, I think consciousness actually, as an entity, I guess, is transcends all of that. It's beyond that, And I think the brain, obviously the brain has certain, when you damage the brain, it's going to have effects because we are run by our brain. But even when I've read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and when you die, different aspects, your senses start falling away. They go through these 8 stages of death, and your different senses fall away and everything. And when everything falls away, at least in their point of view, what you're left with is this consciousness. And if you happen to be aware of enough of this consciousness, and you've developed yourself enough spiritually, they say you can reach instant enlightenment at that moment. Otherwise, if you're not, you get, all the other stuff takes you away, and you end up going back in and you get reborn again because you haven't realized enough, I guess. One of the experiments I used to do with my students was to ask them who they are. And, I say, who are you? I mean, what makes you you? And they write down things, and I say, well, what did you come up with? And they say, well, I'm a daughter, I'm a son, I'm a happy person, I'm a sad person, I get depressed sometimes, I'm aggressive. They get all these things, and I said, in order to do that, how did you do that? And they said, well, I just looked at myself and I came up with these ideas. And I said, didn't you take yourself and split yourself in half into a subject and an object? And so you really looked at yourself as an object, and this is what you came up with about yourself. And I said, but what about the subject? Who's the subject? Because that's you too. Who's making that judgment about you? And then they go, well, let me think about it. So then, they start saying, well, it's probably this and that. And I said, no, that doesn't work, because what you've done is take this part of the subject, tried to cut it in half, make it an object, and then analyze that. But what is the subject that's doing that analyzing? And you cannot turn that subject into an object. It's the consciousness, it's the awareness that transcends this ego, this object that is us. And you can't do it. And I told them the only way you can get to know what that subject is by meditating on it and going into it. And as you go into it, you'll find it kind of expands, and you feel this great peace and harmony and connection. But that's who you really are. And it's my belief that subject, that's the eternal part of each person. And this other part that they define, that's the temporary part. That's the part that goes when you die. But I think this subject part is what stays.
What if they're one and the same? What if there is no separation to start with? The subject and the object is one thing.
Well, I think, I don't know, how would that work. I mean, I think as you look at yourself, you try to look at yourself. I mean, when we create ourselves as an object. We don't know who we are. We just know who we think we are. Our ego is who we think we are. It's not who we really are. It's just this mental concept we've developed that says this is me, but it's not really me. The real me is transcends all of that.
But that's the eternal conversation between ontology and epistemology, and there's a lot of philosophers now sort of given up ontology because it's a very I mean the ontology of something means there's a fixed state, and we sort of come to realization together now that fixed states are doomed to death. That you can no longer the ontology, maybe the ontology of things is a moving target. An apple is food. It could be when it's rotten on the floor, it's a bridge for a worm to cross a patch of water. So the ontology of an apple can change. It depends on how it's been perceived. And therefore, epistemology is always going to trump ontology because it looks like ontology is not a fixed thing in the first place. So if you look at yourself and you're thinking there's a fixed thing that does not change, that's making the judgment, and it's absolute and it's superior, and that is making judgment on something that is temporary, that changes over time. So you can make that exercise over periods times of your age, when you're a teenager, when you're a young man, where you're an old man, and that perspective does not change, but you change dynamically, and you're still sort of reassessing yourself. But what I'm suggesting is it's one in the same. You are evolving, and your consciousness is evolving, passing the judgment, and they're never been separated to start with.
Well, I don't know. I have a little problem with your judgment that this thing is a judging. That sounds like the God and everything. I would say this thing is just an awareness. And the awareness is what's eternal. Consciousness, to me, is what's eternal. And I think the problem with kind of the modern view is we're trying to conceptualize it, and in Taoism, Lao Tzu, talks about the Tao, and the Tao is undefinable. And because no matter what you say it's always more than that. And, the Tao Te Ching is written in these sort of parable poetry things that are not always exactly clear. And the idea is you can't really say exactly what it is. It's always more than anything you can come up with. And the idea, I think, is what the Taoists are trying to do is to move us out of our head and into our heart, because the Tao is an experience. And so when you're in harmony with the Tao, it's not a thought process, it's an experience, it's a felt sense. And so, as you're moving, you want to decide whether to do something, you feel your way into that direction. It just, it feels harmonic, it feels balanced, it feels right to do this. It's sort of like falling in love. It just feels right. You don't do this. You don't try to explain it through chemicals in the brain. At least I don't. Maybe some people do. But it's something that just feels right. Now, I'm not saying the brain doesn't have any role. They have to sort of work together. But the heart, I think, is the one that connects us to what I would call the ultimate, to the Tao, to the Brahman, to consciousness. We have to feel it in our heart.
Yeah. See, there's in Islamic tradition, and in the ancient world, they did not much know about the brain. They thought the heart was the object of thinking, and where the intentions are and everything, and that's because they linked the heartbeat with certain when you're interested or in love or feeling certain extreme emotions, and it was always thought to be that. And in the Quran, it's actually mentioned the heart as the device of thinking. We now know better, and we know that the heart is only nothing but a pump, and you can actually replace it with a pig's heart, like in a certain heart transplant that happened just recently, or have no heart whatsoever and have a pump instead while you having another been transplanted. Well, you can't do that with the brain, but the brain holds the emotions as well. Because we, for some reason, now we say, oh, well, the brain is logical and the heart is the emotional part. But we know now, even the emotions come from the brain. When you say heart, is that a figure of speech, or do you actually mean the heart?
Well, I think it was Ramana Maharshi commented that we have our physical heart and he called it a spiritual heart. You may have a problem with that, but he called it a spiritual heart, which is a couple inches, I don't know, to the right of the regular heart, he said. And that's where you have these, this is the connection. And for a lot of people, the heart, a lot of these teachers, the heart is sort of what opens us up into this other world. I'll just say it that way. So, I mean, if you fall in love with somebody and you feel love for somebody, where where do you feel that? Do you feel it in your heart? Do you feel it in your head? Don't you feel when you feel a real connection with somebody? Don't you feel it here rather than here?
Uh, well, it's the heartbeat. Yeah, it's obviously it's the excitement. It's actually, we know exactly where it happens in the brain, where you meet a potential partner and you have all these arousals, you have all these, not just sexual but even emotional. They're all happening in the brain, and we can see them. We can actually scan the brain and see where the heat map of the brain. But it does cascade to the heart, So you get the skipping heartbeat, the fast heartbeat. So that's what the connection is. But you're still right. I'll grant you that. You can't really tell me where exactly in the brain this is happening, but it's the brain is collectively is an a stage of excitement, in a stage of happiness and an awe and the numinous, so which makes love quite an interesting experience. But it's very funny because the same person you fall in love with, after certain chemicals dwindle, after or fade away after 10 to 15 years from marriage or being together, certain things do drop. And it's just nothing you can do about it, unfortunately. But you can replace it with other things like
Well,
camaraderie and friendship.
well, yeah. I mean, I mean, you're right. It is a decision, and you like maybe the initial flame is gone, and then if you after a while, it's like you still have a great compatibility with this person, and so you just so you make a decision that even though it's not as crazy as it used to be, it's still something worth pursuing, and decided to stay here. But you can go out running and your heart can go fast, and you do lots of things that make our heart beat fast, but they're not it's not necessarily the same kind of response, that kind of deep warm feeling you get in your heart when you actually love something or someone. It's a totally different kind of a feeling.
Yes, I mean, and it's granted that, and that's why I don't. I'm fearing the hard materialism, where these sort of experiences are completely downplayed and deemed to be not important, and explain everything in physical terms. I still want to watch a movie and listen to a song and feel something. It's part of us. As I said, it's only the last 2 million years where our prefrontal lobe cortex has evolved. Before that, we spent 500 million years sitting with an ancient and a brain that is more controlled by emotions and reactions rather than the logical, let's sit down and work things out sort of thing. We reacted most of the time, and we survived on the back of that. And we don't want to lose that, because that's very, very strong part of us. But also, if the climate change is not gonna put us under threat, our apish tendencies, like the war right now happening, are still getting the better of us. They're still in the 21st century. People who think it's all right to invade another country, or attack other people just for a little bit of piece of land or a bit of extra wealth. And looks like we still have a long way to evolve properly.
Yeah, I mean, we have these factions, us versus them, and it's caused all the wars, not only between countries but between individuals. And to me, it's really a question of, are we going to really be run by this lower nature, really our ego, or are we going to reach up into this higher nature where we feel connected to everything? as opposed to feeling cut off and separate from other things. And so I think, we need kind of an evolution up to our higher nature if we're going to survive. We can't stay in this lower nature. And I just think climate change is sort of like thrusting ourselves into our faces and saying, this is who you are. This is what you're doing. Are you happy with this? Are you ready to are you ready to finally change? Because, often fundamental change doesn't happen unless there's a catastrophe. Always catastrophes usually are required, because most people, if things are going relatively smoothly in their life and, they have a chance maybe to make a big change and they go, nah, I don't think so. Things are not great, but they're okay. And, it takes a lot for people to get out of their comfort zone, and things have got to be really bad. You have to really hit rock bottom before, or people do, before you change. And even when I had my little mystical experience, I was in this deep depression, and, and I was in college, and I was actually studying Marx and Hegel and everything, and I love the idea of their evolution. And a guy came in one night, Friday night, one of my roommates, and sat down, and we just started talking. And he was a mechanical engineer, and he was into the physical sciences. And I don't know, I was just talking a little bit about how this evolution in history made so much sense. And I don't know, he said something, and it just, and all that depression just went away. I mean, it was like somebody just took a bucket of water and poured it over me, and it all went away. And I was just like on fire. I think we talked all the way till 8 a.m. We were having a big party in our apartment later that day. We had to go clean up, but I was like wired with energy, and so was he. It was really interesting.
I'm going to get into that question a bit later, but I've got a question for you from one of the viewers.
Okay.
What does Dr. McGraw want to tell us about cosmic wisdom? He touched on cosmic wisdom in his book.
Well, cosmic wisdom is that universal wisdom that underlies everything, I think, and it rests in each of us. It rests in every being, and we have to take that inner journey to go in and contact it. It's an experience. And once you have that experience, then everything is different. And I think it's kind of this cosmic wisdom. If you've got a problem and you're working through it, and you're trying to get some inspiration or get an answer, and you think about it really hard, and maybe you finally say, and you go do something else for a while, and all of a sudden the answer just pops in your head, and you go, oh, you have this aha moment. I think that's a little piece of that cosmic wisdom. That's a little bit of creative intelligence of the universe that has sort of thrown up in your mind this new idea. I think it's the source of all creativity. And, if we feel like we've got this writer's block or we're stuck, we need to go through, look into that and go down and tap into that. And, we use the universe uses us. It's a symbiotic kind of a relationship. It needs us and we need it, especially right now. We need the wisdom that it has to offer, because it takes us out of our ego. It opens us up to see that we're all in this together. We're all interconnected. We're all part of the same thing, and we're either going to sink together or we're going to survive together. I mean, it's a good question, but it's really hard. It's a difficult question to really complete. It's like answering the Tao. You can't just say this cosmic wisdom is this, and then somebody goes, oh, okay, now I understand it. But you don't really understand it until you have an experience of it, I think.
Yeah, which is going to actually lead me now to the final part of the conversation. I'm very intrigued about that personal experience that you were subject to that changes your worldview on things. What exactly happens? Can you take us through what exactly happened? What triggered it? Who initiated it?
Oh, it's just,
what happened?
Said, I can't even remember what he said, but I was just talking about Marx and Hegel, and how I was feeling stuck in my life, and I just liked the idea of evolution, a dynamic world, and intellectually it made a lot of sense. And we were just talking, and I was saying, and Marx or Hegel would say this, and you go, oh, that's interesting, and my physics class, we were saying this, and we sort of got this thing where I would say something and he would sort of counter it with something more in the physical sciences and say, oh, that's kind of similar to this. And again, I can't remember exactly what he said. He just said something, and my brain exploded. It just detonated. And,
Yeah.
and when that happened, you do see everything connects. I mean, one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, ideas lead from, one idea leads to another idea, leads to another idea. It's a constantly creative source of ideas. And, that's,
So that's more like an epiphany, or like a sort of a realization, more intellectual. But did you go through an experience that altered your consciousness? Like
that was the experience that altered my consciousness.
Yeah. Oh, so it was triggered by an intellectual incident, not where you kind of out of body or something kind of supernatural.
No. We were just having this discussion, and he just said something that blew my mind, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but you can't remember
what exactly was said. You sure you don't remember exactly? No, I can't. I mean, this was a long time ago. We're talking like the early 70s or something. So.
Right. I believe he was a professor of Russian history, was it right? And that guy you were talking to, and he was interested in communism and.
Oh yeah, well the guy I was talking to was just my roommate, but I guess that maybe I talked. I don't know. Maybe I talked about. I had a Russian history professor there who was really a good. I mean, he was a great teacher. He only lectured, but his lectures were fascinating, and he spent like 2 weeks on, well, maybe a little more, on sort of Marx and sort of the history of socialist thought and Hegel and everything. And I just thought the idea of evolution was just really fascinating to me. And when I had that experience, I realized, I mean, that's why I'm so big on the evolutionary thing now, because, I mean, if I were to say it, that is sort of my religion, I guess. I mean, spirituality is evolution. I see everything in terms of evolution, so, I mean, there's just, and it really is it's kind of the hero's journey, evolution, in a way. We go through these experiences, and then we come to these realizations, which take us up to a kind of a higher level of understanding.
What do you think happens after we die? Our consciousness persist, and do we assume other forms, or what happens exactly after we die?
I'm not exactly sure. I'm kind of, I read these things. I'm not, I hear these people talk about who supposedly are realized, and they talk about, it's all consciousness, and, that's the thing that stays along. I can understand that. I can relate to it, but I'm not quite personally at that experiential level to completely say that's it. I haven't had the ultimate proof, but I meditate. I'm working on it. But I think it's probably true. But I'm sort of, when Socrates was going to die, and he sort of wanted, in a way, some people think he sort of wanted to die. He certainly didn't fight to stay alive, and and then finally he said, I'm ready to go. It's time to go. And he says, if I go up there and I meet lots of interesting people, I have interesting conversations, that will be great. I look forward to it. But if I just go to sleep and that's all it is, I'm fine with that too. So, even sort of Socrates seemed like he didn't even know for sure, at least the way he was talking.
Maybe that's part of the excitement.
It's the ultimate mystery there.
Yeah. Dr. McGraw, I'd like to thank you so much for such an interesting conversation. I really enjoyed myself. One more time, this is the book you've written. The Amazon link, folks, is in the description of the chat. Please check it out if you would like to purchase it and have a read. And I'd like to ask you, Dr. McGraw, to if you have any final thoughts to this conversation.
Well, just along those lines, I don't know if you have my website put up there also, which is bruce-mcgraw.com. And so I do have a mailing list on there. If people are interested, they can sign up for it. It does send back a confirmation email that you have to click on. So if you don't see it, one, come back pretty quickly, check your spam folders and whatnot. And I'm going to start writing some blog posts and posting on medium.com and whatnot to take different aspects of this. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I enjoy talking about that, and it'd be interesting to get into at least some of your in a little more depth about, random is not really random. There's certain parameters on the random. I would like to get into that sometime a little bit more. I'd like to hear, how you, what a little more about that.
Sure, absolutely. The website is in the description as well. Please check it out, guys. I believe we might have another conversation. Maybe we'll probe the science a little bit and see where this is heading. But regardless of any disagreements we had today on intricacies or little details, but I'm with you wholeheartedly on the fight for our existence and our little blue planet, our home. We're going to need to keep safe, not just for our sake, but for all these beautiful creatures that live within as well. Not just us. It's not all about us. So we are the guardian of the galaxy, or the planet Earth at least. Then we should take good care of Earth, and we should make it a better home for us right now and for our future generations. I'd like to thank you very, very much. And I'd like to have wish everybody watching us today a good day.
Okay, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you very much.